A family of 8 was found deceased in a house fire in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Authorities are calling the incident a murder-suicide, implicating the parents, Brian and Brittney Nelson. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the True Crime Squad. I'm Kristi Brower, here with my sister, co-host, and partner in all things crime, Katie Weaver. Hey, Katie.
Hello.
How's it going?
It's going well.
Yeah, you've been refereeing a little bit, I heard.
Oh, my God. Yeah. When my kids were little, you have all of this stuff, the diapers, the crying, the crying, the, the
And the
breastfeeding,
crying.
and then, yes, also the crying. But somebody told me one time, well, as your kids get older, the bigger the kids, the bigger the problems. And that's true. And not that my kids are even problematic, except for that it is a very grouchy day. I don't know.
It
Well,
is.
we're
Yeah.
recording Tuesday night for our Wednesday episode, but Tuesday has been a very grouchy day. And not just on my plate, but just everywhere.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm checked out. Mom off duty.
Gotcha. You've clocked out.
Yes, off the clock.
Good call. Well, we have a doozy for you today. And I have a pretty specific reason for covering it because it is not always the kind of case we cover. But anyway, we'll get to that. But before we get there, I know that
But
Katie.
wait, before that,
Oh.
Case updates tonight are going to be nuts.
Oh, yes, that is true.
There's so much bad behavior in court right now that I don't even know what to say. But I'm going to bring some of it to you because, well, I'm astonished and you should be too.
Oh, man.
Be sure you come to case updates tonight because, good Lord, there is something in the water. Oh.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just carrying through with this grouchy Tuesday, right? There's been a lot of grouchy days lately. But in the meantime, you do have a DNA for the win for us.
I really do. So this is about yet another case that was solved by familial DNA. This time, the perp is alive.
Well, that's good news.
And has pled guilty. So,
wow.
Good stuff. But I was intrigued and kind of entertained about how his DNA was gathered. So I had to dig a little further into the story, and I thought you guys would find it interesting too. So this is Geovanni Borjas.
Okay.
This is also Michelle Lozano and Brianne Guzman.
Okay.
Michelle Lozano was 17. She was murdered in 2011. And she disappeared from across the street from her high school. And then the next day, her body was found by a homeless person. It was in some kind of like a big plastic tote and wrapped in several layers of plastic. She had been strangled and she had been violently sexually assaulted.
Oh, God.
Right at the very end of 2011, the other victim, who, sorry, I keep having pop-ups come up, throwing me off. Brianna Guzman. Brianna Guzman also vanished. She was 22. She vanished as well and wasn't found for a month. And her body was found along the side of a freeway in California. Her cause of death was unspecified trauma to the throat. She also had been very violently sexually assaulted. And there were no leads for a long time. The police just did not know. There was DNA at the scene, though, that they had gathered and hung on to, but they didn't have any hits on it for quite a while.
Okay.
And they also didn't know that these cases were associated for quite a while. I I'm not sure why, because the cause of deaths were, I mean, it was all real similar, but I'm not so sure that it
Mhm.
wasn't in a different count. No, it was in the same county, I think. Anyway, whatever, but they
Mm.
didn't seem to associate them for a while.
Mhm.
Um, Finally, they did tie them together and decide that maybe there was one perp that was in charge of both of these.
Mhm.
Well, they finally decided in 2017 to do the familial DNA,
Mhm.
which, as we know, that is solving old murder cases right and left these days.
It is the absolute hero of forensic science right now.
hmm It was a controversial and an expensive decision on the part of the police officers, on the part of the chief who decided to do it and full send
Oh.
that at the time. This is one of the
Mhm.
problems with familiar or with the DNA work is that it's very expensive,
Yeah.
and these departments just don't have a budget for it. I mean, we're talking
Mhm.
about, didn't we? I believe we learned at one point that the lowest ball amount for these would be $5,000
Yeah, yeah.
and up.
Because 'Cause they're quite labor intensive, like,
Yeah,
these genealogy expert DNA people, like, it takes a really
them a
long
very long
time.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that it's
Yeah.
getting faster, I think they're getting better at it, but yeah, it's real
Yeah, and
labor
and there's
intensive,
just more DNA entering into the system all the time, and that makes a
right?
difference too, that they have something to work with. Anyway, so to make a longer story short, they finally were able to track back Geovanni Borjas' father, who had been charged with a sex crime earlier in his life.
Mm.
And from him, they moved back to guess who was living in that same town and in that area.
Mhm.
So they put a couple of detectives on him and they were just watching him and they watched him spit on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Hard yick, but after he walked away, they ran over
Jackpot.
and gathered that evidence. And lo and behold, it determined him as the perp.
Wow.
Um, of course, initially he pled not guilty, and they've drugged this out for quite a while. Well, he has finally just pled guilty on all
Wow.
counts. So, 2
Wow.
counts of first-degree murder, as well as kidnapping, forcible rape. I mean, there's so many charges against him.
Mhm.
The only challenge is that the
Mm.
prosecutor initially had promised the family that they would be seeking the death penalty, and they've changed gears on that because they made a political pledge to do away with the death penalty in their county. So
Oh.
now they're not seeking the death penalty, and the families are very angry about that.
Mm.
Um, that's that's a whole other conversation, I think, the whole death penalty conversation. But that's probably the only snafu. I'm just so grateful for the families that, I mean, these happened in 2011, so it has been more than a
Mhm.
decade, but they're finally solved. But,
Yeah.
or well, finally convicted. It was solved a few years ago, but at any
Mhm.
rate, and he's alive to prosecute because how many times have we seen these cases the last few years where the perpetrator has died a long time ago?
Yeah.
So I'm glad that he's here to stand accountable for what he did to both of these sweet girls. It's a
Right.
horrible crime.
It is horrifying to think how many of these, uh, predators have
Mhm.
died with no consequence for
Yeah.
committing multiple murders and rapes and stuff that
Mhm.
to think that they died having gotten away with it is
Awful.
it is.
Awful. So I was grateful in this case that that isn't the case and that he
Mhm.
finally pled guilty so that the families don't have to go through any more of this.
Right.
Yeah.
That is
So there you have it. DNA for the win again.
nice.
I'm going to kick the mic back over to you for our main case.
Yes. All right. Well, this case is horrendously sad, but there's a reason why we need to talk about it. So this is coming out of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Last week, there was a house fire in Broken Arrow, and what they found in the house was six children and their two parents deceased in the house.
Mm,
Started out looking like a horrible tragedy
yeah.
and then continued to look like an even more horrible tragedy. So Let me tell you what happened on that day. It was last Thursday, um, so right near the end of October 2020. Um, so Brian Nelson called his parents and asked if he could bring the kids over for a while, drop them off for a visit so that he and his wife could have some time. That was a pretty common thing that they did a lot. Grandparents helped a lot. Their
Mhm.
children were between the ages of 1 and 13, 6 kids.
Mhm.
And they said they'd be over at 5 p.m. They never showed up at 5 p.m. And then they never showed up at 6 p.m. And the grandparents have been trying to call. There was no answer. Grandparents only lived about 5 miles from the Nelson family.
Oh, wow.
Then they turned on the news, the 6 o'clock news, to see that there was a terrible house fire, and they gave the cross streets of the house fire, and that is exactly where their son and his family lived.
Oh.
Dad said that he just felt like he needed to get in the car and get there, and so he did.
Mhm.
And, here we have this terrible tragedy. They're all dead.
Oh my god. These
W
poor people.
Right, these poor grandparents are absolutely destroyed over this because
Oh.
they've lived 5 miles from the grandkids, they
Yeah.
help babysit them, they're with them all the time, like, this is a
6 kids
6 children
and their son
and their
and
son and their
daughter-in-law.
daughter-in-law.
Oh my god.
So, the police at first weren't saying much, and they didn't release the names of the victims, and then this week, they have come forward to say they don't have completed autopsies yet, but what they do know is that not a single person who perished that day died from smoke inhalation or burns. They were all dead before the fire got to them.
Mhm.
And they have now implicated Brian and his wife Brittney in a murder suicide. So
My
it does
god.
sound like, because there were firearms taken from the
Mhm.
house, it sounds like likely what happened is that the children were shot. They set the fire started in the room where the children's bodies were. They
Mhm.
set that room on fire. They moved to the front of the house, and they either shot themselves or shot each other, is what it's looking like. And those
Mhm.
details may change some, but that's pretty much
Mhm.
what it's looking like.
Oh my god.
And so, of course,
Horrific.
these poor grandparents are absolutely horrified. The community, the neighbors, everybody is just
Yeah.
sick. Well, the reason I wanted to talk about this is what they're uncovering in Brian and Brittany's life. Brian, many years ago, had a fall while working in a grocery store in the dairy department and had a very severe concussion from that fall.
Oh.
So he's been living with a brain injury since then,
Mhm.
and a brain injury that brings on migraine headaches that are absolutely excruciatingly painful, and there's not really anything that can be done about it.
Oh.
According to them. I would bet finding the right doctor, having a lifetime of migraines myself, that
Mhm.
there probably was, but this family was really limited financially. They had
Right.
both
Very
parents
limited resources.
yeah,
Yeah.
both parents had been out of work since 2020. They actually took out
Mhm.
bankruptcy in 2020. They were basically living on state assistance with 6 children.
Oh boy.
Because Brittany had not ever worked since her kids were born because
Sure.
she
6
has
kids?
6 kids,
Yeah.
and
Daycare for 6 kids would be
could
more
you
than they
imagine?
both make.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the reality in this economy of trying to take care of 6 children,
Mhm.
um, financially, I cannot imagine.
Mhm.
Yes, it was really difficult for him to work with
Mhm.
these headaches. I mean, how do you work when you can be struck by one of those at any time,
Yeah.
you know? And, so it's horrifying. It's horrifying that they got to the point that they saw this as their only way out. I mean,
Yeah.
parents definitely helped in every way that they could, financially, watching kids,
Sure.
were very involved, but,
But there's still a limit to what,
limit, I
you
mean, they
know?
still have to, support their own household too. Brian and, Brittany were deeply in debt, and they just appear to not have seen any way out of this situation but to take their children and go, literally, and then
Oh
try
boy.
to make it look like a house fire, probably to save Brian's parents
Yeah.
from having to go through this,
Mhm.
not knowing that it would be it's easy to tell.
Yeah.
If you don't have any smoke in your
Yeah,
lungs and
but
you die in a fire, you didn't die from the fire.
right, but that's tells you how desperate the mindset was, you
Mhm.
know, that there
It
was any
does.
belief in them that this would fly.
Well, and there's a lot of question around, was this planned or was this just spontaneous because they made the plans to drop the kids off at the grandparents? Why would they do that if they'd made a plan?
Right.
And so maybe something really brought things to a head and we just don't know what that is yet. There's a
Mhm.
lot of information yet to come,
Mhm.
but I think that we have to recognize the stress people are under financially right now
Yeah.
and the difficulties that people are facing. And you look at this couple,
Mhm.
and I mean, I don't condone what they did, but I do empathize with the kind of stress they were under at the time, and they literally didn't know
Absolutely.
how they could possibly support these children
And keep going.
and
Yeah.
keep going. Yeah. So it's a reminder to pay close attention to your loved ones
Mhm.
and people that you know are struggling. I think it's important to know that if you know someone is struggling, then they're struggling a lot more than you know. Like if they've let slip something, there's way more things. I
Yeah.
think that's generally true of most people.
Mhm.
And just, being aware of local resources and helping people. He could have had so much better help. But if he didn't have the right insurance and he didn't have the money to go to doctors, and there was likely a solution of some sort for him
Mhm.
for the but it just basically ruined his life when that accident happened.
Yep. Yep.
And I don't know, just the whole thing is really sad. Brittany, her parents both died when she was growing up. She was raised by
Oh,
relatives. She just never really had a lot of family. And so this was her family. She made her
yeah.
family and
Mhm.
then had, a very close relationship with her in-laws. And she just didn't have anything to fall back on. And the in-laws were helping as much as they absolutely could,
Sure.
and they say that they're stunned, that they had no idea that it
Mhm.
had come to this point.
Mhm.
We know that they owned 9 guns
Mhm.
because they had to do an inventory of their assets when they took out bankruptcy,
Sure.
and several of their assets were actually guns. So they had 9
Mhm.
guns in the house. We know there were firearms, present at the scene where this
Mhm.
occurred. So we don't know totally the whole story yet, and they are talking like it
Yeah.
is both parents. They're including both of them. This isn't like a single parent, an individual parent who did this and killed their spouse and then themselves. It's more like
Right.
this was a plan together.
Mhm.
I'm sure more information will come forward um, over time,
I
but I
think
just,
there needs to be a deep dive into what were they reading? What were they watching?
yeah,
What were they listening to that may have contributed to taking them down the path that this was the only solution?
right, right. Yeah, somewhere they were so hopeless.
Mhm. Yeah, and maybe potentially fearful,
Yeah.
fearful of the future, fearful of
Hmm.
of what else is to come. I'd also be interested to know, like, what wolves were, like, currently at the door,
Right,
Were they just about to get their power shut off, their phone, their whatever, what was so
right.
pending that they went, "There's just no way for us to financially recover from this," you know?
Right, and was it that, or was it getting sucked into these apocalyptic beliefs?
Right.
And,
That's my biggest worry is that
it's not
that's really
like
where it's at.
is it me too? I'm worried about that, particularly because, there have been some other murder-suicides in the last couple of years with parents
Mhm.
taking children with them rather than leaving them to live in this horrific world and believing
Mhm.
a lot of wild conspiracy theories
Really
and
scary stuff, yeah.
yeah. So, this story is horrific and sad.
Mhm.
But I also think it's a little wake up for all of us that we need to be aware of the people around us and I always think it's a good idea to just know what the resources are in your community, even if you don't ever need to access them.
Yeah.
If you know what they are and can guide somebody a little bit toward where to go to
Mhm.
get some help, I always think that's
Yeah.
powerful. And that
Yes.
might be easy for me to say because I'm a social worker and I know what's available in my community.
Mhm.
But a little Google search, a couple of phone calls, you can figure it out
Yeah.
so that can assist people. But this level of desperation it's terrifying.
Mhm.
It's absolutely
It
terrifying.
is. Very, very sad. So
So,
sad for the kids' schools and friends
and
and
friends and stuff, yeah.
neighborhood and, like, everyone who knew them for this to happen, just
They
all of it.
apparently really kept to themselves. Some of their neighbors didn't realize that they had 6 children.
Really?
Mom
Wow.
homeschooled them,
Oh, wow,
and
okay.
so they didn't even realize that there were that many kids in that home.
Wow.
I think we have to get a little bit more familiar with our neighbors,
Yeah,
all of us.
yeah.
And it doesn't mean we could have that someone could have prevented this, because maybe not,
No.
but some awareness of how much they were struggling and,
Yeah,
maybe some other resources besides Brian's parents because they were already helping so much
yeah.
could have come into play here.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yes, most definitely on that. Well, gosh, I just really, really hate to hear that. That is a very
Yeah.
sad story. But
Yes.
I will say this too. I hope that they fully investigate what the hell was going on in their lives and that that is made public.
Mhm.
I know
People
that's
need to hear
sucks
these
for the
stories.
family, but people, yep, need to hear these stories. We need to understand what the heck is going on in people's heads when these things happen. We
Right.
need to understand where their thought process was, what they were hearing, thinking, believing. It's important.
It is important. And if we have never experienced the kind of desperation that this family was experiencing, it's difficult often for people to empathize. And so, yeah, hearing the
Mhm.
story, some people may
Yeah.
not realize it could ever get this bad.
It makes me think about that dad in California a couple of years ago who took his 2 children to Mexico and murdered them, his 2 littles,
Yes.
because he believed that they had reptilian blood and
From their
that they
mother.
had to die from their mother.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And this is part of all those really scary conspiracy theories out there
Mhm.
that people have bought into so heavily that, yeah, they will
Mhm.
literally kill their own children because
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah. No, I hope this wasn't the case in this one, but it worries me.
I do too. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that, there's some possibility there. Something
Mhm.
brought this to a very
Yeah.
desperate head and we don't know what that is. So
Yeah.
I hope you're right that we
Mhm.
will know, and I agree with you that people need to know these stories.
Mhm.
It's
They do.
important.
It's the only way to prevent them in the future is to understand why they're happening.
And other people to be able to recognize when
Mhm.
somebody is in serious trouble.
Yep, for
And,
sure.
we can't always um, prevent things, but
Mhm.
sometimes we can if we just recognize.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Okay. Well, that being said, Katie, I know you have a little WTF news for us.
Lord, do I. This genius right here's name is Eloisa Fraga.
Okay.
And Eloisa was at a Halloween party with some family members a
Mm-hmm.
couple of days ago and was playing with a gun, a handgun,
Oh,
as you don't do,
as
you
you
know,
definitely don't do. Yeah.
just playing with a gun
Good
and
Lord.
accidentally shot the gun. Well, the gun was shot directly at an 18-month-old baby that was sitting in a stroller.
God.
Now, miraculously, the baby had a cell phone in their hands.
Oh.
And the bullet hit the cell phone first, and then the whole operation hit the baby in the chest.
Uh-huh.
Well, mom and dad didn't want to have to admit what happened to the baby.
Mm-hmm.
So they went to the hospital with the baby and told the hospital that the cell phone exploded. The baby was playing with his cell phone and it exploded. And that's what this massive chest injury on the baby is from.
Oh my God.
Well, the
Yes, because
hospital
cell phones
staff,
just combust like that, sure.
the hospital staff wasn't stupid AF
Mhm.
and knew that was wrong and that something else had obviously happened here. So they, of course, called the authorities,
Good.
who immediately moved in to do an investigation. The baby's going to be okay, thank God.
Good.
This could have been so much worse.
Yeah.
The cell phone, I'm guessing, saved this baby's life, but
Mhm.
they got involved, finally learned the real story, and that these guys
Mhm.
were essentially just covering for a family member to try to keep her out of trouble. You
Mm.
don't take your children that have been shot to the hospital and lie about what happened to them, for Christ's
Right.
sake. I mean, how do you expect them to get the right medical care?
Right.
But anyway, she's been arrested now and charged with a, a couple of things, for being a
Mhm.
complete freaking idiot. And the baby's going to be okay. I'm sure there's, an open investigation against. Now, I don't know this, but I'm assuming there's going to be some investigation against mom and dad too for
Probably at
going
least
to
some
the hospital and
supervision.
lying. Some
Yeah.
supervision,
For a
probably. Yeah.
while to see if maybe they can make a little bit better decisions and also maybe not allow people to play with handguns in their house around their 18-month-old baby. Maybe
They
that.
weren't at their house. They were at someone else's house.
Oh,
But
still, I mean, if
still,
that was
yeah.
happening, you should pick up your child and leave immediately. Like,
Hmm.
just why would you take the risk?
Hmm.
Mm,
Yeah. It reminded me a little of the gummies case last week of
yeah,
the woman whose little one ate a whole bunch of gummies and she didn't take them to the hospital until it
yeah,
was too late because she didn't want to admit it happened.
yeah,
Guys, if something happens to your children or those freaking road raging dads in Florida that we reported on a couple of weeks ago
yeah.
that literally shot each other's children in their cars.
Mhm.
And they never took those kids to the hospital until the police called the ambulance because they
Yeah,
were too busy fighting each other.
yeah.
Come
Ridiculous.
on, do better. Good
Yeah.
Lord. Anyway, that one just really got under my skin. Like, how?
Well,
How?
I'm glad she's being consequenced because she
I,
needs to learn a real quick lesson here
mhm.
that you don't screw around with guns like that
No,
ever.
she's 33 years old.
Good God.
She's not a teenager. She's not a young adult that maybe has some life lessons to learn. She should have
Mhm.
known better.
Yeah, she surely should have.
And
Wow.
honestly, in my best world, anyone who gets to have any proximity to a gun should know better. But
Yeah.
obviously, they don't.
No, they don't. In states like Idaho, where anybody can carry,
Hmm.
and we open
And
carry, and
Texas. And hmm.
all this crap we have going on, you have lots of unexperienced people.
Hmm.
You know, I just
Well,
think
and
about like
just,
all of the lessons our dad taught us around guns.
hmm,
I mean, we know what you do not do.
yeah,
Because he made sure that we learned that. But it's clear to me on a daily basis that lots of people don't know anything about guns and
yeah,
don't know anything about gun safety.
yeah, totally. They don't. And they just get too casual about
Yeah,
guns. Just
yeah.
way too casual about guns. And this is the kind of stuff that happens. So I'm glad that the baby's going to
Mhm.
be okay. But that is terrifying.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Wow. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So there are three rather bewildering cases for you today. This
Hmm.
is our Wednesday episode. We'll be back tonight at 7 p.m. Mountain on YouTube and in our Facebook group for the Wednesday night case updates live stream. And as Katie said earlier in the show, it's going to be a doozy. There's a lot to talk about. So don't miss that because we update everything it's too hard to do a new episode every time there's an update in a case. So we put
Hmm.
them all together every Wednesday night. And you're
Yeah.
all invited to join us. It's really a lot of fun. So we'll
Yes, it
be
is.
back for that. We already have 2 other great episodes this week if you want to check those out. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment because that helps us grow.
For sure.
Yeah, you know it. We are the True Crime Squad. Thanks for being here.
Take care.